Welcome to Novelist Spotlight, the podcast where published fiction writers are interviewed to gather their insights and writing lessons so we can use them to make ourselves better and more effective writers. There are just 3 things I ask of you, if appropriate to you and your experience. Please subscribe, please click on the like button, and please share this program link with any family members, friends, or colleagues who might be interested or benefit from the content. Now, on with our program. This is my console. Thank you for joining us. In the spotlight is Dallas Woodburn. She is an award-winning writer of fiction, nonfiction, plays, and she's an in-demand book coach. There's so much I could tell you about Dallas. I'm going to tell you some up front here. Dallas is a woman, by the way. Her name is not for the city of Texas, the Lone Star State, or Dallas, Texas. She's not even a Cowboys fan, I don't think. And she was actually named after her grandfather, whose middle name was Dallas. But she did visit Dallas one time, and the local diner gave her a free breakfast as soon as they saw that her driver's license had the name Dallas on it. So free breakfast for all the girls named Dallas, I guess, at certain diners in Dallas. So again, she's an author, a teacher, a speaker, an editor, a writing coach. Her life's work has been, all things writing and all things teaching. She spends her days chasing her 2-year-old daughter, Maya, around. Maya is a Sanskrit word, by the way, that means illusion. So that's a fundamental concept of Hinduism. So I suspect there may be a spiritual illusion there, not to be confused with illusion with an A. We'll find out. I'm going to let her talk here in a moment. She takes yoga breaks during the day. She's working on her new novel, which we're going to learn more about as we go here, I hope. She writes short stories, essays, and plays. And she's teaching writers of all ages in small groups and even individual lessons. She's a big reader. She reads a lot. Maybe we can find out what some of her latest reading has been. She goes for walks in the neighborhood. And she also does some baking and cooking, but nourishing meals. She qualifies that by saying nourishing meals. Like what, I wonder? Maybe we'll get into food here in a little bit. Her husband's name is Alan, and I'm sure she credits him with a lot of her success, being the supportive husband that he is. Is that true, Dallas? What did I say that needs to be edited? You're an editor too, Dallas. Welcome to the program, and tell me what needs to be edited of what I just said.
Oh, thank you. That was such a lovely introduction. No, you had it all right. My husband is so supportive and yeah, you described just a lot of my days, writing and baking and playing with my daughter and teaching and really lucky.
Talk about food a little bit. What do you bake and what do you cook that's nutritious? Yeah, you're very focused on health. It sounds like you walk, you do yoga, you probably do some other things, and you eat a nutritious diet. What are some of the things you cook and bake?
Oh, well, I do love my chocolate as well. That's one of my little writing treats I give myself. But yeah, I think especially becoming a mom, I'm always looking for ways to sneak extra nutrition into my daughter's meals, whether it's pureeing up a pasta sauce that has like hidden veggies in there. I like to bake a lot. I think I've talked with other writers about this too, that I think sometimes having hobbies, whether it's gardening or cooking or baking, can be really helpful for the creative process because it just gives your mind a chance to wander while you are doing that activity that is another form of creativity. You're creating something out of nothing. But so for me, I do feel like I really enjoy it. And it is a great part of my creative practice just to have that time, whether I'm cooking dinner for my family or baking something, to not be focused on trying to solve a plot hole or a problem with my writing, but just to kind of let my mind wander. And often that's when the light bulb goes on, or just my subconscious mind is kind of working on solving some of those issues or coming up with ideas. So I do think it's really useful to have a hobby or a love that gives your mind some time and space to wander.
So when it's wandering, I just talked about this in the last podcast, the one I just posted today, we were talking about how the writing and the things that we're working on, they incubate when we're away from the actual writing. For instance, when you're cooking, baking, doing yoga, taking a walk, spending time with Maya. Do you find that to be the case, that it sounds like you do get ideas, things will strike you when you're just allowing your mind to wander while you're occupied with other activities?
Yes, definitely. And I love that word you use, Mike, that incubate. I think that's such a beautiful word to describe it. I mean, I think it's such a balance, as with so many things. We need to have that time and that practice of sitting in front of the keyboard or the blank page and, giving ourselves that practice of putting our words down on paper. But I do think it's also important to have a balance where we are giving ourselves some margin. For me, like you mentioned, yoga or going for walks is another great time to get ideas. I kind of imagine it in myself as almost like a filling up of a creative well inside of me. And then when I sit down to write, I'm unleashing that, onto the page. But so it's like if I haven't lived my life, gone out in the world, had some incubation time, read books that inspire me to fill up my well, then when I sit down to write, I'm going to be blocked or I'm not going to have ideas. So I think it really is about finding that rhythm that works well for you, where you have time sitting down to do your practice of writing, but then you
Mm.
also have time out in the world to
I'm
fill
glad you
up
said
your
rhythm.
well.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you said rhythm, because writing is so much about rhythm, and it doesn't get talked about a lot. It's like so many other things in life. Music is about rhythm, dancing's about rhythm, but there's so many other things that are really about rhythm. I mean, if you look at the universe and the rising and setting of the sun and the rotation of the planets and the stars and so on, but when it comes to writing, I don't think there's a lot of people who don't really regard rhythm as part of writing, and yet it is. And then what you're talking about also, I think, to superimposed over that is the rhythm of life, just your daily rhythm and having something going on in terms of feeling that it's together. I mean, let me put it this way. I love going on vacation, but at the end of a vacation, I always feel like I'm ready to go back home because
Mhm.
I want to get back to my rhythm. I want to get sleep in my own bed. I want to get back to the gym. I want to go to my yoga classes. I want to get up and retire at the same times and so on. Anyway, I just packaged up a lot there, Dallas. So, what about rhythm in writing? What about rhythm in life?
Yes, I certainly agree. And I love how you brought up just so many examples in the natural world of rhythm and in other art forms. I do think something that came up for me also was this sense of, I think in society and maybe in other types of work, we have this notion of wanting to be quote unquote productive and producing
Hmm.
all the time at the same rate or at a very high rate. And I do think that with creative projects in particular, we need to have there are times of creation, and then there are also times when things feel quieter and we're really kind of sitting with ideas. It makes me think of more the natural world, with there's a time where you're just waiting for the seed to sprout. And then there are times when the plants are blooming. And the four seasons, I think, is another apt metaphor. But so I think that there
Exactly.
are there are
Yeah.
those natural rhythms that sometimes we in our modern world kind of lose sense of that. And so I
And
like
the
to
Four
tell my clients
Seasons.
a lot with the four seasons that it's really helpful if you're in a time where it's kind of like a winter season that you have to trust that the spring is coming again.
And I love that analogy. Also, just the whole thing of when you're writing a novel, it has different parts to it. It has different stages. It could be likened to seasons. It goes through the metamorphosis, just like nature does when it's moving from winter to spring into summer and fall and so on. I want to read something from your website. Have you ever read Shakti Gawain, the spiritual
No.
writer? Okay,
Mm-mm.
it sounds like you're channeling her here. This is what it says, and this is the part of your website that's talking about your teaching of students, teaching writing to students. It says here, and I again, quoting from your website, you possess the power to express yourself fully in a way that makes you feel brave and whole and understood. You can tap into the amazing creative energy that is already within you, just waiting to be nourished and unleashed. You can use writing as a tool to better connect with others, to connect with your deepest self, and to move your life forward towards your biggest dreams. And that is another reason why your daughter's being named Maya, which means illusion in Sanskrit, led me to think of you as, it sounds like you're a very spiritual person.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think for me, writing is such a big part of connecting to something that feels greater than myself. And also, thinking about my purpose, and thinking about the legacy that I want to leave behind. For me, it's so much about connection with myself, but also connecting with others, with people who read my work, with other writers. And I just think there's something so magical about books and writing, just this idea of minds coming together across time, across space, and how someone could write something hundreds of years ago that I pick up today when I'm having a hard time in my life, that comforts me and makes me feel less alone. I mean, to me, that's just so beautiful. And there is such a layer of, spirituality in that for me.
So, have you had the experience of, I've heard of this, it's never happened to me. I'm still waiting for it to happen, where you are in kind of that channel where the writing seems to come from the outside, from maybe a higher place, and you're basically reading what's coming up on the screen. You're typing away, but you're not really thinking about it so much as it is just appearing in front of you. Have you ever had that experience?
I have. Yes, that's one of my favorite experiences in the writing life, just getting into that flow where the way it feels for me is almost as if, especially since I write fiction, I write some nonfiction too, but this has happened to me most when I'm immersed in a fictional story, where I almost feel the way that I would feel as if I were reading a book, but I'm writing it as I'm going. So it's like I can't wait to see what's going to come next. It doesn't necessarily feel like I am crafting the story as much as it's just flowing out of me.
Yeah, see, that's I'm envious. That's the
Mm.
sort of thing that just sounds um, magical, very magical. Is there anything that you do to facilitate that? Is there anything you do to prep yourself? Anything you do that facilitates that kind of a connection where, I don't know if you would call it a muse or not, but that kind of tills the soil and makes it prepared for that to happen more readily?
I love this question. This is something I'm actually very passionate about, is helping people find routines for their writing, or maybe rhythms for their writing, as we were talking about before, rituals even, that feel really nurturing and that, like you're saying, help till the soil or kind of facilitate getting into that flow state, which does not happen every day. It's a special thing when you feel in that flow. But for me, really trying to not only set aside my writing time, but do something that makes it feel kind of special and different from the other times that I sit in front of my computer. We do so many things on our computers these days with, emails, and a lot of us work from home, for our day jobs. And I think it's so easy to have our writing just be like one more thing on our to-do list, or one other tab that we're clicking over, and also clicking back and forth between our email or something like that. So for me, it's really important to kind of ground myself in my writing time. I like to take a little bit of, a few minutes before I start to, I have like an affirmation. I kind of change it up, but something I say to myself to enter my writing time. And I also like to do something to mark the start of my writing time, and then also the end of my writing time. So one thing I like are candles. I think it can be really powerful to light a candle to begin my writing time and then blow it out at the end, just to kind of signify that day's session is done. But anything that you can do, I have found to make it a little bit more of a ritual. So maybe you like the idea of lighting a candle every time you sit down to write, or having a certain playlist of music that you listen to only when you're writing your novel, or doing a few yoga poses or stretches before you sit down to write, just to kind of help you ease out. I think a lot of what I'm trying to do is sort of ease out of the responsibilities and the obligations and the tiny urgencies of my daily life, and sort of ease into this timeless space of my creativity and my fiction.
So you have your rituals, and you said be at the start of your writing time. What is your writing time?
It has shifted a lot since becoming a mom. It used to be much more, I guess, predictable. But I've learned that with having a daughter with her own schedule, I have to be a lot more flexible. So typically, I like to write in the mornings after I drop her off at her preschool. So it would be around 9 a.m. And these days, my writing sessions are usually only about 30 minutes long a day. It used to be before I became a mom, I could have longer stretches of time. But what I've found is even 30 minutes or 20 minutes a day done consistently really adds up over time. And I think this also is important with thinking about getting into that flow. Um, just keeping an active relationship with my creative projects. So if I'm able to even just check in on my work 5 days a week, or, every day for 20 or 30 minutes, it helps me feel so much more connected to what I'm working on. And I think the ideas flow just a lot more smoothly than if I was setting aside like an hour once a week. For me, just that daily rhythm really works a lot better, even if it's a small amount of time.
That's a great piece of advice because, I mean, I've talked about it's important to write pretty much every day so that you have built up some momentum. But you're talking about even if you are not going to necessarily be actively writing, to spend time with the copy, look at where you're at, and stay connected in that way. And also just the fact that you are 30 minutes a day is not a lot of time. And yet,
Mhm.
with the consistency, what you're saying is you're producing novels, writing 30 minutes a day.
Yes, exactly. And I love to, I agree with what you said about the momentum. I think you also do create this momentum. And I think when you are able to have a daily practice or a rhythm, as we talked about, of writing, checking in on your manuscript, I almost think of it as like a relationship that you're cultivating with your creativity or with your book project. You're showing up for your book. So I think your book is going to show up for you in return when you're trying to check in every day. And I think it does build that momentum. And I do think that just those little bits of time, even though each one individually might seem that you don't get very much done, when you zoom out, you'd be amazed by, like you're saying, just consistently every day, a few hundred words here, another 100 words there, or maybe you're just reading over what you wrote yesterday and mulling over some new ideas. I do think that it really adds up, and it helps the whole process, I think, just become a lot more enjoyable, um, because it just feels kind of like a part of your day that you're not asking yourself, well, am I going to write today? Or I don't know, when am I going to do it? You just kind of know that you're going to write that day at this time for this amount of time. And it's not something that you have to make a decision over or stressed about. It's just a part of your rhythm, a part of your routine, the same way that you don't ask yourself if you're going to brush your teeth that night, or, if you're going to eat dinner. Like, of course you are. It's just part of your day.
you know, um, and you're not really, I mean, 30 minutes is not a monumental amount of time. So you're not overly committing. You're not creating an onus there. You're making it something that's very doable. Who can't carve out a half hour a day to do this? Now, there are some people who can't, but most people, 30 minutes a day, especially for something that's a priority, of course. I want to share the titles. I love the titles of your books.
Oh,
You've
thank
got
you.
one called 1001 Ways to Be Kind. Now, that's a forthcoming book that'll publish in the fall of 2023. How to Make Paper When the World is Ending, which is a collection of short stories. Thanks, Carissa, for Ruining My Life, which is a YA novel. The Best Week That Never Happened. Woman Running Late in a Dress. Those are some they're provocative names. It's the kind of title that makes a person, I think, if you're in a bookstore, let's say, pick up that book and just open it up and, let me get a hit off this thing. What is this like? What do people need to know about you as a novelist? I mean, right now there are people who maybe have never heard of Dallas Woodburn until now, and they're wondering, is she somebody I should be reading or not? What's her style? What's her subject matter? Can you put a little definition to that?
Yes, and thank you so much for that compliment about my titles. It means a lot. I
Hmm.
Well, I guess I could share a little story from back when I was a graduate student studying fiction writing. I got my MFA in fiction from Purdue University, and while I was there, I felt I learned so much, and it was so great to have this dedicated time to work on my writing. But I almost felt like I had to kind of pick a lane, pick a genre, like I could only write one sort of story, I guess. And most of my classmates there were working on literary fiction for adults. So that is what I was writing as well. And I really enjoy writing and reading literary fiction, contemporary fiction, often centered around families, romantic relationships, modern issues. But I also had this secret love of young adult fiction. I still love reading young adult fiction. I think there's something that is so interesting about that time of life when we are 16, 17, 18, and kind of discovering ourselves, who we are, where we fit in, who we want to be. And so I would write literary fiction during the day for my classes, for my workshops. But at night, I had a secret fun project that I would work on that was my young adult novel, which ultimately became Thanks, Carissa, for Ruining My Life. And I remember at the time feeling so torn and like I had to pick one or the other to focus on with my career. But I've since learned that that was a lie that I was telling myself, and that it is not only okay, but I think it's something wonderful to write in a variety of genres. And I almost felt like it was kind of a wink from the universe when this past year you mentioned two of my books, Thanks, Carissa, for Ruining My Life, and the short story collection, How to Make Paper When the World is Ending. They both came out earlier this year in 2022. And both of those books, the seeds of them began during that period I was describing of my graduate school time. So I would say that I'm a writer in a variety of genres, but what most interests me is, I guess, just the relationships among people. I think I always start with character with my writing, and I think that's really at the heart. But I also love experimenting with structure and kind of playing around with the reader's expectations. So I have my novel, The Best Week That Never Happens, takes place over the course of 1 week. Thanks, Carissa, for Ruining My Life alternates perspectives between two characters, and they're living a very similar kind of parallel lives, but we get to switch back and forth between their perspectives. And then my short story collection, How to Make Paper When the World is Ending, I play around with time, different ways of telling a story, and it's just really fun, I think, to sometimes, I guess, subvert the reader's expectation or kind of play with the narrative of how we tell stories.
I was going to ask you, where do you get the confidence or the vision to write a YA book? You're not a young adult. I mean, you're a young woman, but you're not a young adult. And
Mm-hmm.
but you were saying you like reading YA books. So having read them, that's what really informed your own writing when you tackled YA. Is that the idea? Is that
Yes,
correct?
I love reading them. I've also been writing and publishing for a long time. So when I first started really writing stories and writing my first novel, that has not been published, but it was my first real attempt at a novel, I was a teenager myself. And so I think I just naturally was writing young adult fiction because I was writing about what I knew and, just my experiences as a teenager. And so I guess I just, as I grew up, I continued to really enjoy reading that genre. I think there's a lot of exciting experimentation going on in the young adult genre. And I guess too, I feel like, at least for me, maybe this isn't true for everyone, but I do feel like I'm very close to the teenage self inside of me. It's not too hard for me to kind of go back in time to what it was like being 16, 17, 18 and remember. I think just the intensity of that period of life, and so much is new and you're discovering so much, that I just find it to be a very fun phase of life to write about.
Yeah, I like that you use the word intensity. Yeah, that it really is true of your teenage years. They're very intense. We're very high energy. There's a lot of hormones going on. There's a lot of trying to fit in. There's a lot of, concerns about, am I going to go to college or am I not? What am I going to study? What is life going to offer me? Or what am I going to take from life? You must be good at it because you were a 2020 YA Book Awards finalist, it says here. Which book was that? Was that for the best week that never happened?
That was my debut novel.
Another one of your novels, or actually, it's a collection of short stories, an award winning collection of short stories. I neglected to name this title, but it's called 3 a.m., as in three in the
hmm
morning, 3 a.m. Now, is that the title of one of the stories, or did you name the book separately from the stories?
That one actually is unique. So normally with my short story collections, Women Running Late in a Dress and How to Make Paper When the World is Ending, those both are titles of a story in the collection. But 3 a.m., I was really stuck on a title and I tried out different titles of the stories and just none of them really seemed to fit for the whole collection. And this was back before I became a mom, and I now am not a night owl because my daughter gets up very early, but just naturally, if left to my own devices, I very much like to stay up late. And that used to be when I would do a lot of my writing. The house is quiet, you're
Mm.
up by yourself. It sometimes feels like the whole rest of the world is asleep and you're just up, dreaming with your words. So I happened to look at the clock one day and I saw it was getting close to 3 a.m. And I thought, hey, that could maybe be an interesting title. And what I was trying to allude to was this idea of that I wrote many of the stories and edited them and rewrote them around that time of night. But also that idea of when you get really into a book that you're reading, that you just lose all track of time and suddenly
Mm.
you look up at the clock and it's 3 a.m. So that's where the
Yes.
title came from.
Yeah. It's such a compact, memorable title. So easy to remember. Oftentimes people will say, "Oh, I have a great book recommendation for you. If I could just remember the title or I could just remember the author." But something like 3 a.m., it's succinct and memorable, very easy to convey. Now, short stories are a big part of your writing. Are you first and foremost a short story writer or a full length novelist?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever really thought about that, in that way. I would say that I think I now my ideas come more as full length novels. When I was first starting out writing, like many writers, I began with short story. I think that short stories can be such a wonderful way to learn the craft, hone your voice, explore a lot of different ideas and genres. And uh, I do think that the short story form has its own challenges, being so compact and trying to tell a full story in 10, 12, 15 pages is a fun challenge. So I guess I would say now I think of myself as more of a novelist based on the projects that I'm working on now, but I think I will always also be a short story writer. And something else, I guess a little tip if anyone's listening who is also working on a novel, I think it can be really fun to sometimes take a break from your novel, especially if you're kind of in the middle of it that often feels so messy, and just to work on a little short story on the side, almost like if you were training for a marathon, but then you take a little break and do a 5K race or something. I think it can be very fun to play around in a shorter page length and to have that sense of accomplishment of finishing a short story, when for a novel you are working on that for me at least, it's a pretty long slog to get to the finish line. So I would say I'm primarily a novelist with short stories sprinkled in.
So, in addition to being a Boilermaker, a graduate of Purdue
Mm-hmm.
University, where you got your MFA in fiction writing, as you had mentioned, prior to that, you were a Trojan, University of Southern California, and you studied creative writing, got your bachelor's degree in creative writing. You knew what you wanted to do, it sounds like. And because you were studying writing from the undergraduate to graduate, and you minored in entrepreneurship, interestingly, at USC, which, by the way, USC, for our listeners, it's so well known as a sports school, a football powerhouse, or it had its years when it was certainly was that, but it's also a very highbrow university. It's not easy to get into. It's a private school, and it's a truly an institution of higher learning. Did you know that you wanted to be a writer from what age?
Yes, I feel very lucky that I found my passion in life at a very young age. I think part of it is being fortunate. My dad is a writer. He's a journalist. When I was growing up as a kid, he was a sports columnist. And then he's now a more of a human interest columnist, and he also writes books. So I grew up with a writer in the house, which I think is such a thrill and such a treat that I was able to kind of witness what it's like to be a writer. Just he was living the life of a writer, and I got to see that. And I think like many kids, I loved reading. I loved making up stories. And I think just because I had that example of seeing my dad working at his computer and seeing his published pieces, I just always knew that it was a possibility for me too, in a way that I think for a lot of us, we don't quite make that connection. You know, we go to the library and have these books that we love to read, but it doesn't quite seem that there's actually someone out there who wrote those books. So I wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. And I was lucky when I did study writing at USC. I had some amazing professors who taught me so much. And then at Purdue was where I really discovered my love of teaching writing as well, and being able to be part of the community in that way. I think when I was a kid, I imagined myself just alone at my desk all day writing. But now that I'm actually living it, I'm not an extrovert. I wouldn't describe myself as, but I'm too extroverted for that. I really like having connection and being in community and feeling like I'm able to help encourage others.
Should we know your father? Is he a name we would know?
Oh, well, you might. His name is Woody Woodburn. He writes for the Ventura County Star. It's the hometown paper where I grew up, and he also wrote for the Torrance Daily Breeze for a while in
Oh
the Los
yeah,
Angeles area. And he's
those are
published quite a
Copley
few.
newspapers,
Are they
or
what?
used to be Copley newspapers.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So you saw your dad. That's a gift to be able to know what you want to do with your life early, because so many people struggle trying to figure out what they want to do, where they should be. Now, what is the 2022 Thriving Authors Summit? I saw that on your website. You're doing a little advertising for it. Is that an event that you attend, or is it one that you actually organize? What is it?
Yeah, that's an event that I organized and put on. This year was the first year, but I'm planning to make it an annual event. It's virtual, so people can attend from all over the world. And what I did was bring together 20 speakers to give talks about all parts of the writing journey. So from dealing with perfectionism and trying to overcome procrastination, to mapping out your book, to the actual writing process, to then editing and marketing and launching your book. So it was really fun to get to curate these different speakers and put together these panels. And then, yeah, as you saw, advertise it. And we had a lot of people sign up and got really great feedback from it. So it was a really fun event.
So it's gone past this year already. You've had your first event, but you're planning on doing it annually.
I am planning to do it annually. It just ended. And actually, if anyone's listening to this who is thinking, oh, I'm so bummed I missed it. Like I said, since the events are virtual, you can contact me and I'd be happy to send you the link to get access to them, even though it's officially ended.
The other thing that you've done is that you are the founder of Write On, as in writing, Write On Books. It's a literacy organization, it says here, but it says you're a passionate champion of young writers. Talk about Write On Books. When was it? When did you found it? And what does it do?
Yes, thank you for asking about it. So this is an organization I founded actually when I was in high school. So it's been a lot. It's been, gosh, almost 20 years now. When as I said, I always loved writing, loved reading. And I was a tutor in high school. And I was really surprised to find when I would go to some different libraries and meet some of these younger children than I was, and to learn that they didn't have many, if any, books of their own. And to me, as I'm describing my childhood, my dad was a writer. I just was surrounded by books. And I think that libraries are wonderful. And I love being able to go to libraries and check out a book and bring it back and check out more. But I do think there's something that is so powerful about being able to have books of your own, especially as a child, where you can write your name in the cover. You can dog-ear the pages if you want. You can underline things. It's something that really feels like yours. So Write On Books began first as doing book drives in my community to collect new books to give to underprivileged children for around Christmas time, around the holidays. And then it just really grew from there. So I began also offering writing workshops. I also have published 2 anthologies of poetry and short stories written by young people. And it's just something that I really love. For me, it really reminds me of kind of why I fell in love with writing in the first place. I think that just being able to encourage young people and help them realize some of their dreams around writing in the same way that I've been so fortunate to have people supporting and encouraging me, it just feels really gratifying, and almost like a way that I'm able to try to pay it forward.
Now, being that you're an instructor of people who want to write, people who are aspiring authors, what is the biggest writing problem that you see dogging your students? Is there something that is very common that you would identify that this is really the issue I see the most that's holding people back?
Yeah, I love this question. I would say, I think for a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too, I think we can be so critical of ourselves, and we compare our first drafts to the final drafts of books that we read. And we sometimes let that self-criticism get in the way of actually doing the writing. It always just pains me when people give up, or when someone will talk about having this book they want to write, but not actually sitting down and writing it. And I think often we are held back by a lot of mindset issues, whether that is perfectionism or just feeling like we're not good enough, or feeling like we're not ready, or who would care what I have to say. I just think that a lot of us can really stop ourselves before we even dive in. And then sometimes once we dive in, a lot of work that I do with my clients is just really normalizing the creative process as one that is filled with ups and downs, that you're going to have those days, hopefully, when you're in the flow, but you're also going to have days where it is challenging or you feel stuck or the words aren't coming. And just that does not mean that there is anything wrong with you or that your book isn't good enough. It's just a part of the process that every writer has to deal with. And so I think just really normalizing that and not getting in your own way, I guess I would say, is something that I really try to encourage my clients to do.
Now, could you read a little something from one of your books? I don't know if I talked to you about this ahead of time. I don't remember, but do you have something nearby? Is there a particular book that would be and passage that would be good for the audience to hear you read, so that it's really basically some copy that's emblematic of what you do? And maybe you feel like every book and every short story that you tackle, you have a very different voice, or it's a very different endeavor. But is there something? Do you consider yourself consistent throughout your books? That there's a consistency to the voice and the style.
I do. And that's something that I have heard from readers. I sometimes think it can be easier to recognize in others than than in ourselves. But that is something that I have heard from readers, is that whether it's a young adult novel or an essay or a short story, that they can recognize, oh, this is a Dallas Woodburn piece. So that I feel like that's a wonderful compliment. And yes, I do. I have my latest publication, my short story collection, How to Make Paper When the World is Ending, right here. I'd be happy to read a little excerpt from that.
Please.
So I'll just read the first page of the opening story. It's called Story to Tell Around a Campfire. The first thing to do is look around the campfire and assess your situation. Do you want to tell a scary story or a romantic one? Who is your audience? What are your goals here? Either way, the story begins like this. A young man asks a young woman to go away for a long weekend with his family. They've only been dating for a few months, so this is a big step. The guy's parents and brother, who the young woman has not yet met, will be there. They have rented a cabin in the countryside. It is springtime. The wildflowers are just beginning to bloom. Everyone wants to meet you, the young man says. You should probably give him a name at this point, something unobtrusive, unthreatening. Mark, perhaps. The young woman, Hannah, or something like it, is surprised by the invitation, but delighted. She thinks she might love Mark, and this invitation must prove that he is beginning to love her, too. Yes, she says, I'd love to come. And they hug and kiss hungrily. They leave on a Friday. It is a long drive to the cabin, and Hannah watches out the window as the urban landscape fades away to rolling green hills and cow pastures. They turn off the main highway, and for the final hour, the road winds dizzily up through the mountains. Hannah, carsick, rolls down the window to let the breeze in. If this is a romantic story, the breeze smells refreshingly like pine. Describe the way the sunlight filters through the trees like a spotlight indicating loveliness. A moss-draped log here, a clutch of orange poppies there. If this is a scary story, describe the way the tall trees press up against the narrow road, leaning in, their thick branches blocking out most of the sunlight. The breeze is cold and sends a chill down Hannah's bare arms. That's where I'll stop.
Very nice. You read a lot, so who are your influences? I mean, who are there echoes of anybody in that piece of writing who, um, obviously you're your own person and you have your own style, but we're all influenced by people. Who are your biggest influences? Are there two or three or five names that would stand out?
Yeah, such a great question. I guess for me, a big influence has been, I mentioned my time at USC studying creative writing, and I had a wonderful teacher there who is also an amazing writer. She's a novelist and a short story writer as well, named Amy Bender. And one thing that I feel like her writing and also as a teacher. She just gave us a lot of permission to explore. She writes a lot of magical realism where genres kind of, I guess, meld together. There will be something that seems very realistic, except for one little magical element. And I think just her writing always makes me feel, I guess, just kind of freer to experiment and try new things and not box myself in too much creatively. So I think this story, which you could probably tell just from the opening page, the main conceit of it is the idea of having the same story where certain events happen, but the tone of the story and just the shape of it and the feel of it is told either as a romantic story or a scary story. So kind of exploring those genres in one contained story. So I think an idea like that was probably really inspired by her and just the freedom to let my imagination kind of go. I'm also thinking of another writer I really admire, both for his writing and for his teaching, is George Saunders. He has a wonderful book that I'm reading right now called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, where he examines, I think it's 12 classic short stories by Russian, by the big Russian authors. And it's really neat because the stories themselves are included in the book. And then there's an essay after each one where Saunders is kind of unpacking the story almost as if you were taking a college class with him and really trying to understand what makes the story so great and what is this writer doing. And so I guess those two just came to mind to me right away as authors that I really admire their own creative work. And I also admire the way that they talk about writing and teach writing and kind of unpack the craft.
Yeah, I read that George Saunders book, and it was excellent. It was very good. It was like you're taking, one of his courses at Syracuse University as he walked through the Russian masters and so on. I'm looking at Amy Bender's books right now. She's got one title. It's a collection of stories titled "The Girl in the Flammable Skirt," which sounds like
Mm-hmm.
a Dallas Woodburn title almost. That's one I would expect out of you. I think I have read. I think the New York Times Book Review had some things to say about her. A very complimentary things to say about her. I'm going to have to check her out. I don't think I've ever read any of her stuff.
Yeah,
What are
she's
you reading
wonderful.
now? You always have something going, or maybe do you read like in a collage fashion where you will have two or three or four books going at a time, or do you like to focus in on one book at a time?
Yes, I kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I have a collage based on what I'm most interested in or kind of what I'm in the mood for. But then I tend to, if I really find a book that I love, I tend to kind of zoom in on that one. Um, I'm reading some nonfiction right now. I'm reading a collection, I guess it's an essay collection. It's called Do Less. And it's actually, a lot related to what we were talking about rhythms and creativity and kind of giving yourself space for the creative process. I'm also reading, I'm trying to remember, I sometimes am bad, like you were saying, of not remembering the titles of the books that I just read. Um, I just finished a novel. Shoot. I can't remember the title. I'm going to have to edit this. I'll have to email it to you. Um, shoot. But one that I come back to again and again is Liz Gilbert has a wonderful book. I don't know if you've read it, called Big Magic, about the creative process. And I tend to that's a book that I tend to go back to and reread, just to sort of felt like I was talking about filling up my well and feel
Big Magic.
inspired. Hmm.
I have not read that one, but yeah, okay, I see it here. Elizabeth Gilbert. Yeah. So she's the one who did Eat, Pray, Love.
She is.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's very well known for that. And then this is a nonfiction related to her writing process. And it's also a little bit of a memoir where she talks about her journey as a writer and some interesting stories about things that have happened to her. She's also a novelist and a short story writer.
Interesting. What are you working on now, Dallas? I said to the listeners off the top that we would find out what you're working on. What can you tell us? I know that a lot of times people are secretive about that. For instance, I'm working on one right now that I don't want to tell anybody the title. It's a one-word title. I'm being a little superstitious about it. What about you?
Uh-huh.
What are you working on?
Yeah, I have a new novel coming out next year called Before and After You and Me. And that actually wasn't talking about titles. It's had many iterations, many titles. But this is the one we're going for the published version. And I'm in edits of this book right now. And it also has a little bit of an interesting structure where it's a novel, and it's told in the structure of, in the first chapter, this event happens, this accident. And all the chapters that follow alternate between before and after. So you can almost imagine two timelines. One is going in reverse chronological order, backwards from the accident. So we're getting to see everything that led up to this event. And then the other timeline is it's going forward in time to see the ramifications of what happened after this tragedy. And so that was a structure that came to me early on with my drafts of this book, that a lot has changed about it. It's gone through many iterations, but kind of that idea of exploring going back and forth in time just really intrigued me, and that has stayed true through the many drafts of the book. So that's coming out probably around this time next year in 2023 from Owl Hollow Press.
So when you are done, when you're done with your writing career, because we're all eventually done, we're passing through this life. What do you want your body of work to say? What do you want to be said about your body of work?
Wow, what a question. That's such a great question. Really, yeah, about kind of your legacy. I think I would say that I would love for people to speak about my work in a way that felt like it captured something that felt true to them about the human experience. That's kind of a broad statement, but for me, when I'm reading authors that I love, when I have those moments where I just feel so understood, like they're really able to capture an experience that I felt almost was singular to my life, but then I read about it in a novel or in a book, and I feel like, oh my gosh, someone else gets it, someone else understands. And so I think I've always been very interested as in an author and as a writer in like the details of life, and that's something that I do really feel like is kind of consistent among my body of work, like in my voice. And so I guess I would say that I just hope that people feel like they've read my work, and it made them feel more understood or less alone, or just kind of, I guess, going back to the idea of connection, like connected to humanity, or like more deeply connected to themselves.
Well, that's certainly something to aspire to. Wow. One more question for you. If you were to be a character in your own book, how would you want to be rendered? How would you render yourself as a character if you were writing yourself into one of your stories or one of your novels as a character? What are some of the marks? I like to talk about marks of distinction. Like you introduce a character and you mention like maybe two or three little marks of distinction, and then the reader's imagination just fills out from there. And of course, the characters developed along the way, but oftentimes when they're introduced, it's here's two marks of distinction that really get the reader off to a start. If you were to do that with yourself, or if you want to go render yourself more fully than that, be my guest.
I love this question, and I agree with you about having a few little marks for the character, and the reader can fill in the rest. Well, I would say physically about myself, two things that people tend to notice, or that I notice about myself, is I'm pretty tall. I'm about 5 feet 10 inches tall, And I talk a lot with my hands. I think it's the Italian in me. I have an Italian grandmother. So if you could see me right now talking to you, we're just recording, not over video. My hands are moving all around as I talk. And I would say, I guess, deeper than that, I would hope, just like, I don't know, I would hope that I have a warmth about me that that you could sense, or that I would love to describe as a character based on myself. And being a good listener. To me, that kind of goes hand in hand, I guess, with writing. I always love listening to people's stories and just kind of, yeah, taking it in.
Our guest has been Dallas Woodburn. The future looks bright for you, Dallas. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. It was such a pleasure.